hope you're well. This video is the commentary one to accompany our first reading of the episode called Nausicaa, which Joyce suggested might be called that. I'm assuming you've already watched the chapter where I read the first half of that episode, which falls neatly into two halves. So I'm not going to repeat the Homeric stuff. I think I gave that last time. But setting our scene, we are in the Sandymount area. We're on the beach, pretty much in the same part of the beach that Stephen not only walked along at, what would it have been, about 11 o'clock that morning, but the rocks probably that he alighted upon where he wrote his little bit of poetry and observed the man and the woman as they walked past him and had some erotic thoughts about the woman. So that's our location. We've got our time. Our technique, or art, I think, is painting. And that's telling us immediately, if you paint a picture, you might be depicting reality, but it's not reality. The artist is able to color the scene as he or she wishes, and I think you can tell from the opening paragraph that a picture is being painted for us. Quite a romantic sort of picture. Our color, Joyce suggested that a color might be ascribed to this episode, much as I want to say it's a pinky hue heading towards violet. It isn't. It's blue and a sort of slate grey. And our bodily organs, we get some bodily organs this chapter. And having heard the reading, you might think it's going to be genitalia, but again, no, it's the eyes and the ears. And we should immediately be thinking, if we're getting that, we're getting two of our five senses. And as we're in the vicinity of Stephen's Proteus walk along Sandymount Strand, where he was really thinking about those senses, particularly seeing and hearing, or here we've got seeing and smelling. What else? Okay, so that's sort of generally what's happening. You heard me read, so you know that something has occurred on the beach between a lady called Gertie McDowell, who we've learnt is about 21 years old, and Leopold Bloom. We learnt right at the very end that this gentleman dressed in black, a middle-aged gentleman in black, was Leopold Bloom, and naughty, pervy Bloom. It looks suspiciously like he may have masturbated into his pocket or through his pocket while watching Gertie as she leant back on the rocks, allowing her skirts to rise up in the twilight as she was watching the fireworks that were going off. Fireworks were going off because Mercer's the bazaar that's been going on in aid of the Mercer's Hospital has now concluded, and it ends with a firework display. That places our time at about 8 o'clock. Sunset, I think that day was 8:30. So by the time we get the fireworks probably coincide with the sun going down. What would I like to say? I want to make a few points before I get into it, and I think that will enable me to proceed quickly with the commentary. One, Bloom staring at a woman on the beach. This might This might remind you, if you've read other Joyce books, of the Epiphany scene in book 4 of A Portrait, where Stephen is on the beach and he sees a young girl on the beach. I think that young girl is quite a bit younger than Gertie, probably about somewhere between, I don't know, 14 and 20. She is wading a bit out at sea. She's hitched up her skirts, so her legs are on show. The description of that girl, I don't think we get her name, bears a number of resemblances to the way Gertie is described by our narrator here. Pale-skinned, slender. There's bird-like references in that one. In A Portrait, it was to her breasts were like a sort of small pigeon breasts. Here, the allusion of Gertie to the Virgin Mary, therefore the dove. Taxil, back in chapter 3, talked rather crudely, referred to it as the pigeon. Ivory skin, graceful, gazing out to sea. There's lots of similarities in that. There is a Joyce commentator, very well-known Joyce commentator called Fritz Zen, now very getting on in years. And in the critical essays, he makes the point that, and in fact he references Ellman, who digs out some of Joyce's letters, and when Joyce was living in Zurich, he admired a woman from afar, a woman who he got to know her name, called Martha Fleischmann. Yes, Martha. And as much as we're led to believe that that Joyce was absolutely besotted with Nora, well, he took a few weeks off or a few months off in Zurich when he becomes besotted by this woman who he doesn't know if she's married. It turns out she is. And he makes contact with her and he writes to her. And I don't know whether it's his letters writing to her or letters to somewhere, but his description of her is in similar terms to the way this girl is described on the beach and the way Gertie is described here. Reverential terms, also almost worshipful. A strong theme of this episode is about how Gertie is likened to the Virgin Mary, the Virgin Mother, and so on. Okay, so that's my first general point. I've got a few more. So my second point concerns dream and reality. Why is Bloom there? He's there for a very real. He's in Sandymount for a real purpose. Let's ignore for the moment that he his transport may well have been a fiery chariot, but that suits the one of the themes of the chapters about what comes up, what must go down. The chariot goes up in the air. But anyway, he needs to be in Sandymount to go and visit Mrs. Dignam at 9 Newlands Avenue to talk to her about this life policy. That was why he was at Barney Kiernan's, to meet Martin Cunningham, etc., etc. So that's why he's there. We've lost an hour because he left Barney Kiernan's around 6. Now we're around 8ish. We will discover it is Bloom that is the man in the black suit that is watching Gertie. What's happened in that lost period of time? He's been to visit Mrs. Dignam. Right. So that's the reality. We are entitled to assume that has happened. Our dream is, did this whole business of this whole erotic experience, what actually occurred? Did it really happen? Some commentators have tried to make a case for saying this whole chapter was in Bloom's head, the whole business about him having this sort of, it was more of a wet dream in that Gertie did not participate. This narrative through Gertie was actually Bloom's narrative, Bloom superimposing his thoughts upon her, that she was leaning back to show her legs. He was imagining her doing it. Whether he climaxed or not, these people don't seem to be sure. Okay. I don't really buy that. There is quite a lot of evidence in the second half of the chapter that Bloom has ejaculated. There are smoking guns, if you excuse that double entendre, but it does seem particularly apt to show that he has. So I think what we saw of Bloom in the first half of the chapter really happened. A bigger question might be, did Gertie partake as much as we think on a first reading of it? Was she just an equal partner in that experience, or was that Bloom projecting onto her? That narrative was via Bloom. Again, I don't think so, because there's things that we learnt about Gertie that Bloom doesn't know. For example, he doesn't know her name. He's learnt her name was Gertie. He doesn't know her surname. We have learned that we have learned she's more of a Giltrap than a McDowell. I'll come to that in the second part. But first, there's the whole Martin Harvey thing. That's kind of an argument for it being Bloom's projections. Is this Bloom bigging himself up? Since when did Bloom look like a matinee idol? We know Molly will mention it a bit later, so Bloom clearly does bear that resemblance. Maybe Bloom has gone round saying he looks like me, I look like him, that it's got into Molly's head, and that Bloom is projecting that onto Gertie, because a bit of a coincidence that they both say the same matinee idol, unless he looks absolutely the spitting image that anyone's going to think it. And I think it's a bit odd that no one else has mentioned it, or that day, if he looks so much like him. I think he would have been called him, or there'd have been some reference. So I don't buy that it's just coincidence. I don't buy that it's that obvious. And because of other things we learn about Gertie, I don't think these can be Bloom's projections. So my view is that anything else I want to say, that it pretty much happened the way we read it. Even though I really like the idea, it would be so cool if Bloom actually knows that she is the citizen's daughter, and after what he's just gone through with the citizen, he's standing there masturbating in front of the citizen's daughter. That would be as bizarre as it would be perfect, but I just don't think that it happened. Right. Third point, let's think about parabola. This arc, what goes up must come down. Clearly the fireworks, well, you got Elijah's chariot, you've got the swinging of Gertie's legs, you've got the tumescence and de-tumescence. Obviously, with Bloom's erection, that will then dwindle post-climax. You've got, on a miniature scale, the blood vessels within Gertie. She blushes very easily, and there's a lot of up in the first half of the chapter. Everything is up. Things are rising all the time. She blushes from her throat to the top of her head. Second half of the chapter, things in Bloom's narrative, things are really coming back down to earth. Anything else to say on that? Yeah, I mean, it's not literal. The first half is not completely ups. There are a few lows, and the second half is not completely downs. There are a few ups, but generally speaking, the chapter is arcing like that. So, for example, another of the ups will be the fact that Gertie imagines that Bloom is a taller man than he actually is, because she's at a lower down, her vantage point is lower down, and she wants that to be, so that's how it is. But then it bursts with the climax, and this sheen of perfection evaporates like the fireworks as Gertie's disability becomes apparent. And this sheen of transparency, let's think about transparency. Stephen was in this very position that morning, couldn't see very well, like now in the fading twilight, looking at rocks. What were those shapes? He was talking about the diaphane and the adiaphane, this going through this transparent veil from what you think is a real object might be a mere diaphanous vision. And how many times in this chapter is there reference to Gertie's stockings being transparent in the twilight, in this fading light? I don't think that's coincidence. A few more points. My next point concerns myopia, something with which we spent a lot of time thinking about in the last chapter, and the citizen. And it was very obvious then he was representing the one-eyed cyclops. So had this one-eyed view of the world, very Fenian, very nationalistic, very and anti-immigrant, just completely Ireland for the Irish, whatever Irish means, which we discussed last time. And we've learned fairly early on that Gertie McDowell is the citizen's daughter, and we think, goodness me, she couldn't be more different, graceful. Well, I won't comment on her physical appearance because that's irrelevant, but seemingly unconcerned with politics, mainly concerned with fashion and art, and her being the canvas, applying makeup on herself to make herself look good, so she can stand in front of the mirror narcissistically, and the mirror can say back to her how beautiful she is, and this complete romantic view of the world. But we've really just moved from Fenian sentimentality to this sort of Mills and Boon romantic sentimentality. So in that sense, like father, like daughter, a phrase Bloom almost uses in the second half of the chapter, not applying it to them though. And yet, just as with the citizen, things aren't necessarily as they first appear, and he's this now old weak man suffering terribly with gout, can barely move from one end of the pub to the other. So with Gertie, well, she has her obvious imperfection, but she's also on the inside quite catty, and has grown-up feelings. One might think she's completely immature, talking about this 16-year-old boy, or I'm guessing that he's about 16. She's about 21. A few years back at a party, he was still in short trousers, and she's truly upset that he can't be her boyfriend anymore. So there seems to be this pretty immature woman, but she has grown-up needs. She isn't this romantic, idealized vision of beauty as one might first get the impression. Okay, next point is about Bloom's suffering. Let's try and make an excuse for Bloom. He's had a really hard time. He's gone through, he knows what's going on back at his house. We're after those hours now, he hopes. If Boylan turned up at about 4:30, it's now 3 hours on, so he's hoping whatever has happened, or 4 hours on, he's hoping whatever was happening has happened. He's gone through what he's gone through with the citizen, a very traumatic experience. Maybe not as traumatic as we thought at the time, now that we're recalibrating the citizen, but still not great. Not great to be the butt of virulent racist argument. And then, last but not least, he spent the last hour in a house of mourning, and he goes on to say in the second half of the chapter how draining that he has found that. And he's so relieved to now be in this peaceful situation. The sun is going down. He's needs some rest. He's undecided about what to do next. He thinks about going home, but he decides he can't go home yet. He's going to take a bit of time out here and relieve the pressure. Okay, so let's not condemn him out of hand as much as we might want to. Next point concerns blasphemy. The word profane literally means outside of the temple. Where this scene, where this profanity will occur, is outside of the church. That is just there. This retreat is going on in the church. We can hear the service. We can smell the incense. We are literally on the steps of the temple, give or take, over the road, and we're on the beach. And this book, and the book gets banned for obscenity because of this chapter, and the obscenity is fairly obvious. I don't know if it was also banned for blasphemy, but I could easily believe that it might not have been, because that is less obvious. But in my view, well, not that I care that much about blasphemy, but and would not advocate blasphemy laws, but even more insulting. I think if you're going to be offended, it's the blasphemy that really should get you, because how Gertie is aligned to the Virgin Mother, and at one point the impregnation of the Virgin Mother, the Annunciation, "Thy will be done," all of that by Thy word. Is, and the fact that Gertie is being worshipped in the same way that Bloom, in what he is doing, is worshipping at the shrine of Gertie. This, in her looks, the way she's dressed, her aspect, there are many characteristics of the Virgin Mother, and yet look at what Bloom is doing. And so, and does it get even worse? If Gertie's world is nonsense, if ephemeral, just painted a superficial sheen of paint, then is Joyce sort of hinting that that's what Catholicism is as well? So there's some quite serious allegations going on, and but maybe when they banned the book, they banned it for the obvious stuff, and they didn't quite get into that. My final point is about masculinity and femininity, and where Bloom sits on that spectrum. We've had accusations in the last chapter that he's a mixed middling. He's not quite one thing or the other. There were at one point that does he gets headaches once a month like a totty with her courses, and lots of in an insulting way he was said, "You're not a real man, you're half a woman," and that got mixed in with some anti-Semitism like last time, and sort of Jewish characteristics, Jewish men, they're not proper men, blah blah blah. In this chapter, we're going from, as we go from day to night, I think we also leave the part of the book, almost the first half of the book, which has been totally masculine, almost barely a female voice, into much more of a feminine world, beginning with that opening paragraph, which almost feels like we are entering a womb. And with maybe the exception of one chapter, I'm not sure we leave it for the rest of the book. So that's also quite an interesting thing. So, having spent quite a bit of time on those opening remarks, you'll appreciate I'm not going to go through the 20 pages in as much detail as I have done with some other chapters. Firstly, for one, I think it reads a lot easier compared to some, but also having set the scene in that detail, I think you're able to make I hope, make quite a bit of sense of it on your own. So I'll whiz through really. And the first bit, clearly we're setting the scene in Odyssean terms. There's the weed-grown rocks, so it's where the river meets the sea, and there's bulrushes. Odysseus, we know, will be hidden in them somewhere. Three girlfriends. They're not quite women. They're playing at being mothers, in that they're looking after children, but the young children are their younger siblings, and they're acting a bit like girls rather than women, particularly Gertie, who seems to have until recently had a boyfriend who's a lot younger. If she's 21 thereabouts, I think this Reggie is only about 16 years old, so that says, I've already talked about that. And our scene is a romantic scene. All is well with the world. The sun is going down, pinky hues over Hoth Head, amethyst. They're dressed in these sailor outfits with HMS Belle Isle is the name, so the island is very Belle. All is well with it. And then they're playing with their ball. So it's like in where Odysseus gets washed up on the coast. Right. And it's all the way the style of the book is, although we haven't really met Gertie yet, but when we talk about Gertie, it's going to continue in this same sort of style. So it's as though it's being narrated through her way of thinking from the off. This sort of Mills and Boon, we might say in the UK, a very romantic, slushy, sort of way, almost perfect. And if there's one thing we know about perfection, is that it ain't. But then let's go on to 452. But who was Gertie? We're introduced to Gertie by reference by a little game that to make Tommy cry is Gertie. Is she your sweetheart? Well, so Tommy's only 4 years old. Is Gertie your sweetheart? No, he says, on verge of tears. Well, it's not as bizarre as it sounds, because actually her boyfriend, her sweetheart, is this kid that's still doing exams at school. Right. Who was Gertie McDowell? On 452, as fair a specimen of winsome Irish girlhood as one could wish to see. I can't help thinking, if we go back to page 379, and we had that parody of Ireland and St. Michan at that point, and a description of the women then, 379, 378, 379. Right in the middle there. Lovely maidens sit in close proximity to the roots of the lovely trees, singing the most lovely songs, while they play with all kinds of lovely objects, for example, and then it goes on and on, right, in this idealized Ireland at the time. And this seems to be Gertie's way of thinking. It's sort of in the same way, and there indeed, she's more of a Giltrap than a McDowell, so linking her to the citizen's family, and as we go on, we'll realise actually she's his daughter. The next couple of pages links her to the Virgin Mary, her cupid lips, her ivory alabaster her skin and complexion, her grace, the fact that she's largely in blue, with a white hat. It's visually like the Virgin Mary. Page 454, we get a bit more about Reggie Wiley. Turns out to be Protestant. We know that because not only is it said, but also he was hoping to go to Trinity College, and Trinity was strictly a Protestant-only university. Catholics definitely need not apply, so much so they had to create their own university. 455, clothes all are electric blue, scented with her favourite perfume. We're getting, all through this first half, it'll be more eyes than nose. There'll be lots and lots of references, particularly when Bloom and Gertie start this looking competition. Lots of references to looks and eyes, but even at this stage as well. Much more than smelling. Smelling will come in a little bit later, and much more in the second half of the chapter. There's a reference to Gertie's foot on 455, which is interesting to us now that we know that she has a defect in her walk. 456, her very soul is in her eyes. Seems a bit more Virgin Mary. And on 457, her ideal man will be a manly man, perhaps his hair slightly flecked with grey, taking her in his sheltering arms. They have a long kiss. It would be like heaven, the Virgin Mary's domain. We'll get a reference a little later to a book, The Lamplighter, by Maria Cummings. And Gertie actually references it. And that is where a young woman is really rescued by this older man and taken care of. A bit further down on 457, we learn that Edie Boardman will be 22 in November. So we have to assume that Gertie is similar. Moving on, page 459, I see that Gertie gets embarrassed simply by reference to the word beta tetum, reference to a bottom, and that makes her crimson. She bent down her head and crimsoned at the idea of Sissy saying an unladylike thing like that out loud. She'd be ashamed of her life to say. Blimey. Right. More interesting on page 460, where the church comes more into play because we hear it. And it becomes apparent that what is going on there is a temperance retreat. Retreat is where Catholics go off to it's a real sort of study session. The one depicted in A Portrait of the Artist scared the hell out of me, but I'm reliably informed by some Catholic friends that they're not all like that. They can be far more gentle affairs, and this may well be one of those. Anyway, a bit like in Grace in Dubliners, these men are slaves to drink, and they have been persuaded, willingly or unwillingly, to attend this retreat where they pray for forgiveness. They pray to the Virgin Mary. They will hear, no doubt, sermons about the demon drink and all the rest of it. So these prayers are coming out. It's all focused on the Virgin Mary. We're in the parish of St. Mary at Sandymount, and this church is Mary, Star of the Sea. And that rings a bell with Gertie because her own father, she reveals to us, has been afflicted by alcohol and become an alcoholic, which doesn't surprise us now that we know her father is the citizen. But what is interesting is that that it turns out that he hit Gertie's mother on at least one occasion when he was drunk. And Gertie, I did say before that this first half of the chapter, the rising of the on our arc, is not all ups, because she says that a man who lifts his hand to a woman, save in the way of kindness, deserves to be branded as the lowest of the low. So that's definitely a downward glitch in this upward arc. So these men are praying for forgiveness and a way through it. They're praying for intercession from the Virgin Mother, who we are told never lets anyone down, no matter how they've erred or sinned or wandered. And now on page 461, more interesting stuff, in that it turns out the Dignams were very, very good friends of the McDowells. But the father was so bad with the gout today that he couldn't even attend the funeral of Paddy Dignam, one of his closest friends. What we know now is, he managed to make it to the pub, but he didn't make it to the funeral of Paddy Dignam. There you go. And although it's described officially that Paddy Dignam died of a stroke, the Mrs. McDowell says to her husband, "Let that be a warning to you for the rest of your days. If you're not careful, you'll die of drink as well." Right, bottom of the page, Gertie was just like a second mother in the house, so sort of Nausicaa, Princess Nausicaa, on the verge of becoming a woman. There's a bit about snuff. She doesn't like her mother taking snuff. So again, it's a drug, like drink. Okay, let's then further down that page, the ball gets kicked and it goes under Gertie's skirt near the little pool by the rock. The little pool by the rock, I'm thinking of Stephen. I wonder if it is exactly the same rock. So Gertie tries to kick the ball back, but she misses. Is it to do with her disabled foot? We don't know, but it might be. A delicate pink crept into her pretty cheek, but eventually she does kick it back. And there's a bit of bitchiness going on between the girls, which Gertie thinks it's because that stranger over there is looking at Gertie and they're a bit jealous. And it's all fairly straightforward, isn't it? And the first time on page 463, she really starts paying attention to that man. She looks at his face and thinks it's the saddest she has ever seen. Meanwhile, prayers are wafting through. Pray for us, mystical rose, i.e. the Virgin Mother. Pray for the many who had erred and wandered, their eyes wet with contrition. So she's seeing a man who looks like he's the saddest she's ever seen. Is he also praying? Is he erred and wandered? Mr. Leopold Bloom, and needs to pray for forgiveness. Okay, I'm going to whiz forward. Let's go to 465. Gertie, the kids are getting more annoying. Gertie wishes their friends would take them home. It's now getting late. Besides, she wants to be alone with this man. She's gazing out towards the distant sea, a bit like the girl in the Epiphany in a portrait, even though that was a different time of the day, I think. And Gertie likens it to the paintings that man used to do on the pavement with all the coloured chalks. And wasn't it a shame that they didn't last forever? If only the perfect painted world was real and that was how things were. They're looking at each other now. And we're getting a lot more reference to eyes and staring and gazing and wonderful eyes. She could see it once by his dark eyes. Here we have the reference to Martin Harvey, the matinee idol, only this guy has a moustache and John Martin Harvey doesn't. She starts to swing her legs in this sort of almost reverse arc. And we get a reference to the transparent stockings, and I think I mentioned about the role of transparency. She thinks of him in terms of her dream husband, more sinned against than sinning. Even if he was a Protestant or a Methodist, she would make it all right with her love. She would heal him. She mentions about she was a womanly woman, not like those cyclists showing off what they hadn't got. Molly will use that almost precise phrase. And did Bloom also use something like that in Lestrygonians, thinking about with female cyclists? Maybe, but Molly mentions it. And by the time we get onto the Refuge of Sinners paragraph on 466, Gertie and the Virgin Mary have conflated to such an extent it's becoming difficult to distinguish between them. And then potentially an incredibly blasphemous aspect on the top of page 467, as Gertie's thoughts will begin to turn erotic. So we read that our Blessed Lady herself said to the Archangel Gabriel, "Be it done unto me according to thy word." So if it has to be that I'm going to be impregnated by the Holy Spirit in the guise of a dove, so be it. I accept that I am pregnant or I will become pregnant. So, is Joyce linking an anticipated sexual experience on Gertie's part with the Annunciation by the Archangel Gabriel and the Virgin Mother? Goodness me. Perhaps not. Perhaps it's me reading, seeing 2 and 2 and getting 17. We get a first reference to the clock on the mantelpiece just below that. And now I'm going to really move on because there's lots, the girls go off, leave Gertie, or they begin to go off. They're getting ready to go. There's a lot of Gertie and Bloom. Right. They need to know the time, and they go and ask Bloom the time, and he takes his hands out of his pockets significantly and takes out his pocket watch, which he realizes has stopped. And he will subsequently, in the second half of the chapter, think, God, it's strange. It's stopped at 4:30, which was when I fully expect my wife was having sex with Blazes Boylan. Right. Then we get a funny reference to when one of the girls comes back and she says he didn't know the time. There's something wrong with his waterworks, as we shall see. But he expects that it was after 8 because the sun was set. Okay, bottom of page 470. Back in church. So the church scene, and we need to correlate what's going on in the church with what is going on in Bloom's pocket, and correlate the conflation between the Virgin Mary and Gertie McDowell, and all extremely blasphemous, as I've said. And they're more and more looking. Bloom is looking at Gertie. His dark eyes fix themselves on her, drinking in her every contour, literally worshipping at her shrine. It is for you, Gertrude McDowell, and you know it. So more of the similar sort of stuff. Right, the reference to top of page 472, Gertie having been the other girls, having a go at Gertie and over Reggie Wiley. Uh, and Gertie says, well, it's a leap year. I can throw my cap at who I like because it's a leap year. So I think Gertie's likened to Princess Nausicaa, seeing Odysseus, is attracted to Odysseus, wants to tempt Odysseus to be attracted to her in return. And then over onto page 473, with the first appearance of the bat, which I won't talk about here. I think I'll talk about the bat more in the second part. The lamplighter that we've talked about. She's got a drawer at home in which she keeps a notebook. I note that we'll learn a bit about the contents of Bloom's drawer way off in Ithaca. Nothing really to say on 474, 475 when they see the fireworks. First reference to the fireworks. 476, this reference to the lodger who was masturbating in bed with a dirty picture. We've had various dirty pictures in the book. We had one passed round in Cyclops at the pub, and we'll learn about another one in Ithaca. And this business about besides, there was absolution so long as you didn't do the other thing before being married. So there was a difference between the venial sin of being sexually aroused and the mortal sin of having sexual intercourse outside of marriage. So, Gertie is now leaning back and back. The kids and the other women are a little bit out of sight. They've begun to go. They're sort of just over there. They run a bit further down, but Gertie is staying. She's leaning back and she's leaning back. And oh, it's all sort of self-explanatory. Oh, so soft, sweet, soft. Reminds me a little bit, I've written page 61, back on Stephen when he was having his erotic thoughts on this very rock. Touch me, soft eyes, soft, soft, soft hand. I'm lonely here. Oh, touch me soon now. What is that word known to all men? I am quiet here alone, sad too. Touch me. So similar words, I think. Right. Bloom, we think, then climaxes. Potentially, so has Gertie. She has let out a little strangled cry, that cry that has rung through the ages. It's news to me that you could have an orgasm by leaning back and thinking of erotic thoughts, but in Mills and Boom world, maybe, or anything is possible. Right. Bloom, his gun is now fired, and now we're into things are now melting away. He's now looking down. He can't look at her. That gaze. He's now a pathetic little glance of piteous protest, of shy reproach, under which he coloured like a girl. He's been a man. He's had the sort of sexual relationship that Bloom likes. There's no touching. It's a bit like a more dangerous version of his Martha Clifford correspondence. It was all seeing. It was seeing, but no touching. No, don't even know their names here. He was accused in the last chapter of not being a proper man. Now that his sexual experience is over, he colours like a girl. We're told it is Leopold Bloom. There was an infinite store of mercy in those eyes. So like the Virgin Mary, the Virgin Mother, no matter what the sin, she will intercede on behalf of those that come to her and ask for forgiveness. Gertie gets up to go and um, thinks about whether she will return another time, and maybe Bloom will be back there again. Bloom will have very similar thoughts. Their souls met in a last lingering glance. And I think no matter what else we think, there has been some sort of meeting of minds. They have both participated in this experience that at one level was a little pervy, a lot pervy, but on another level also somewhat touching. And then Bloom sees that she is lame. And that was where we finished in the pub. So it was a whistle stop tour. Um, See you next time when I will read the rest of the chapter. Bye.